Hey, everybody, this is the Shenandoah County Sheriff Tim Carter, and thanks for joining us today. And with me, I've got a friend of mine, Roman Rauhala. Roman, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, good morning, Sheriff.
And we're going to talk a little bit about, we've been getting a lot of requests from, well, I've gotten at least two right off the top of my head from citizen groups talking about preparedness for power grid being down or natural disasters, things like that. And I know you've had some experience and expertise in this field. If you want to talk a little bit about that before we get started.
Sure. So, oddly enough, for me, it started when I was a young teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And it started with scouting, but that was not scouting over here in the U.S. It was in Germany. My father was in the military. I had an opportunity to do some scouting over there, and it was much different than scouting here. It was very minimal what we went out to the field with. Some of our scouting instructors were German military.
Right.
And then we actually had a British SAS guy, and his girlfriend's son was in scouting too, and they were all stationed over there in Bonn, Germany, because at the time they were still in East and West Germany. So I remember showing up, and they're like, hey, we're going to go camping next weekend. Please get your permission slip signed, and no sleeping bag, no tents. I'm like, okay, cool. It sounds awesome. You know, as a teenager, like, all right, this is going to be fun. Well, we went out and did what we did, and that's kind of where it all started for me. And surviving with the bare minimum, or as bare as you could get.
Right.
So I thought that was really cool. And, came back to the United States and finished up high school, went into the Army and did 5 years. And while in my service, I was tasked to or assigned to a light infantry unit.
Right.
Light infantry means you're light on your feet. Right. So I was a combat engineer, Army sapper, and had a lot of training and skill in surviving, as you know, with military service, surviving, but we had the bare minimum. So that kind of played into some knowledge I already had. You know, there's not much we're taking with us because we need the additional space for mission essential gear.
Right.
Combat stuff.
Right.
So we're going out there with a poncho liner and a poncho and a way to make a fire, which we didn't do a lot of, obviously, for, OPSEC reasons and not wanting to be seen by the enemy. But we were surviving with the bare minimum. And it was just kind of something that I thought, hey, most people must know this because this is something I know and this is what we do. And finished my time in a service, got into law enforcement, been doing that for over 20 years now, work up in Northern Virginia. And this survival piece, this wanting to make it through any situation is something I've been passionate about for a very long time.
Right.
So I started looking into it years ago, and there's companies out there that now exist, and you can sign up and go to school, and they will teach you all kinds of stuff.
Right.
So I started going to some of this training and, pay out of pocket, do some traveling, go away from the family, get the knowledge, get the skills, have fun doing it.
Right.
And it's stuff that I've become very passionate about. And I've just continued moving forward and educating myself and taking classes. There's no, we're certified law enforcement officers by DCJS here in Virginia. There's no organization that says you are now short of what you get in the military and you get on your DD-214. There's nothing like survival expert, by.
Right.
So
Right.
My skills and experience come from, hands-on through military service or scouting military service, and then just following up and continuing to educate myself and then do it. So, the whole prepping, surviving thing is something that I enjoy. It's something I do. It's something I talk to others about. It's something I've helped others with by giving them the knowledge. And it can be common sense in a lot of ways, but if you don't know certain things or if you don't look at it from certain aspects, you really don't know what you have or what you could use. And I mean, for goodness sakes, I know you and I talked previously that the federal government says we have to have 72 hours worth of food.
Right.
Ready.gov, I believe, or ready.org. They say, hey, you got to be ready. There might be a big storm or natural disaster or man-made disaster. You need to have 72 hours.
Right.
I'm telling you, Sheriff, 72 hours is merely a drop in a bucket, and it's not enough.
Right. Well, we saw that with, I know I was out of town the weekend that everything shut down for COVID. When the federal government, state government, everything shut down, it was a weekend. And we contacted family members back here in the county, and they told us then, hey, don't think you're going to come home and there'll be anything at the local Walmart. There's nothing there now. So we actually saw that happen in real life here.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, I mean, we did our grocery shopping before we left where we were. And but yeah, I'm not sure, from an inventory standpoint, grocery stores, what they have on the shelves. But I can tell you that once those messages go out with the federal government saying everything is shut down, air travel shut down, and all this other stuff, people immediately go and try to stock up on food. So in other words, they don't have enough at their home anyway.
Correct. So 2 days is the average at a grocery store has without trucks coming in.
Right.
We go to our local food line, Walmart. There's men and women who work there, and they're putting stuff on shelves, and that's happening during all their open hours because consumers are coming in, purchasing stuff. Tractor trailers are coming in.
Right.
2 days is the average, and that's kind of that's just a national average. So we might have a little more here, I would think, because we don't have quite the population.
Right.
But up in, for example, Northern Virginia, 2 days is it.
Right. Yeah, and I think the other thing, going back to you're talking about preparing yourself and things like that. Some of it's, I think some things we've lost in our own culture. Like, I know we talked earlier about this. Like when I grew up, it was normal to can food. It was
absolutely.
normal to preserve food and that kind of thing. And it was that way earlier, even for my parents and grandparents. But many people, they're just not into. They don't know how to do it, and B, they're not into it, and there's no need for them to be.
Right.
So they've lost that part of our culture is kind of getting
lost.
lost.
Oh, definitely. So I mean that, like you said earlier, that's now considered prepping. Like somebody's grandma right now is canning, something as we're speaking, and that's just something they do, and that's how the family survived, and that's how they feed themselves. But
Right.
to others, that's totally prepping. It's being prepared, and that's merely what they're doing because during a cold season they had to rely on the food that they got from the harvest. Nowadays that's looked at totally, that's a prepping source of food.
I know when we sent the staff down to a couple of hurricanes. One was Hurricane Katrina, and again, I don't think the public understands what it's like in an environment like that. But part of the reason I sent staff down there was so they could see literally what does it look like when it's, for lack of better words, the end of the world kind of stuff. And everything there's no gas, there's no food. And there are different places. They set up different collection, like there was water distribution points. There were food distribution points. There was housing areas where you could get temporary housing. And, in other words, the environment, there's no store to go to.
Right.
If you want certain things, you got to go to the collection or the distribution point for this thing, or the distribution point for this thing. They were giving out these. They were issuing these credit card things, right? So you could go out and use those to purchase food. There's nowhere to buy food at.
Right.
But that's one of the things they were doing. There was a place where they were issuing those out to residents. And these people had nowhere to go to use them unless they were able to drive like a couple hours, and there was nowhere to get gas. So it was that's the kind of thing the staff saw when they were there. Like, hey, Sheriff, they're giving these credit cards out for people that they can use to go buy food, but they got to literally drive 2 hours to get food, if there's food there when they get there.
Without those collection points, it would take no time before neighbors are looking at other neighbors, and they're like, well, we can't get food. I got to feed my kid.
Right.
Hey, I'm going over to Roman's house to see what he has.
Right.
And depending on how you feel about your neighbors, you can only give what you can give, and you got to think about your tribe. Who's in your family? Who are you protecting? And how much can you give? So I know that your guys and all the other, law enforcement officers and National Guard units in Katrina, they saw the chaos set in some areas.
Right.
Looting, massive amount of assaults, burglary, everything else.
Well, the other thing, one thing before we leave this point, I know 72 hours is the what the government says, but what I try to tell people is it's you got to take baby steps and get yourself to the point where you're at 72 hours.
Right.
Like, what are you going to eat? What are you going to drink? How are you going to function for 72 hours? And then from there, you move on. Okay. Then it's 96 hours.
Right.
Then it's a week. And then, I mean, you can't do all this. I don't think, I mean, I couldn't do it. Some people don't have the inventory capacity for that. But I think, and they don't have the finances either.
Correct.
So I think what people need to understand is okay, you got to get yourself to a certain point where you can self-sustain and then start to build on that. And, you can't do it overnight.
Right.
That's the advice I give people.
Right.
You just can't do that overnight.
You know, cost and storage. Cost definitely comes into play. Storage. When it comes to water, they're suggesting 1 gallon per person per day. But that's really nothing, because that's consumption.
Right.
And then you still have to cook food, and you still need water for hygiene, and you still need water for your cat and dog, and you have to. So a better number on that is about 3 gallons per day. And people are like, wait a minute, if I have 3 gallons of water per day per person, do the math.
Yeah, where am I going to put it all?
Where am I going to put it all?
Right.
That's a
exactly.
lot of water. So you know, if you live in town and you're on a sustainable water source, you're like, well, heck, I'm just going to turn on the water. Well, it's not always going to work that way. You know, if, power goes out, they're going to stop. You might get water out, but is it going to be clean water? How do you clean that water? And then
I see you've brought some bleach over there. I mean, that's one way, I guess. You can do it.
Good old Clorox bleach. I have it in a bag, and they're not. Once you remove this foil at the top of the bottles, they're no longer fully. So if it were on its side, it's no longer fully airtight, watertight. But yeah, Clorox bleach. So 4 drops, 1 quart would clean 1 quart of water. 4 drops.
Right.
So mathematically, a quarter teaspoon is 1.75 gallons of water.
Right.
And that is to make it drinkable.
Right.
So I mean, you can go really far with bleach, and this is just a smaller bottle, and they have various sizes, but bleach does not go bad.
Right.
So it can last a very long time, and that's one of the numerous ways you can clean your water. Boiling water is also a fantastic one.
Right.
But now you have to have a heat source to get your boil going. So
Right.
That's another way. That's a more common way, because people are like, bleach. Well, cities and towns have been using bleach forever for water. That's why you can go to certain towns and cities and go, man, this smells like bleach, smells like pool water. It kind of is. It's not pool water. It's not of that concentration, but they're using, Clorox or some other type of bleach to clean your water.
Right. Right.
So that's one way to, make sure if you're not going to have all the water, you got to have a way to clean your water.
Right. What are the other, I see you get something else there for water.
Yeah. So it's a Aquamira Frontier straw. So this little straw has a filter right here.
Right.
And this is good for 30 gallons. The measurement of 30 gallons, because you're drinking it, I mean, you're like, okay, that's a lot of water. You're going to start noticing that it's the filter goes bad, and then it's going to be harder to draw the water.
Right.
And this is just one company, Aquamira, and then let's see, this one is Alexa Pure. This is from one of the food companies that they make dried and survival food, if you will.
Right, right.
This is good for 30 gallons. So you could literally take this, go to a water source, go to the North Fork,
right,
dip it in the water, start drinking, and you're good to go, Sheriff. You're going to have clean water. I mean, the filtration on them is proven. They've got all the breakdowns and everything, and it will clean water, and you're good to go. So these are also good to have in a car or a backpack. And, we can talk about that some other time once we're talking about, bug out bags or get home bags or survival bags.
Right. So in other words, I guess what we're telling our listeners or people that are watching the podcast is, you should have a certain amount of water, but then you also need to have a plan for once that water runs out.
Correct.
How are you going to purify the water or filter the water that you get afterwards?
Right.
And again, you only have so much space to store water. So that's one thing. Another thing that people are really interested in that I've been talking to lately is when the power goes down. And I mean, there's a lot of things that get affected by that. I mean, first of all, just how to cook food and that kind of thing. But other is communication.
Correct.
And how you get information. I think there's so many people that are reliant. I know my kids, I mean, well, me, my wife, my kid, all of us, for lack of better words, are really reliant on communication that we get either through computer, through our phones. And if power's down, how are you going to be able to get your information? So I know one of the things that we're working on here, and I think they're already doing in Rockingham County right now, but we're trying to do that here as well, is to connect with those ham operators. Because, I mean, we have a generator here, for example, in the sheriff's office, and it would operate for a certain amount of time, but it's gas powered. So you got to have gas to run it. And it's also reliant on a repeater system, which you have to have power at the repeater sites. So my point is, if you have no power, how are you going to get information? And
right.
One of the things I think you and I were talking about earlier is always have like some kind of a radio or something like that.
Good old fashioned AM FM radio. So
right.
That's what this is. But they have battery powered ones.
Right.
This is multi sourced for electricity. It has batteries in it, AA batteries. It has a hand crank on the side, which you literally just crank it up and it builds up the battery. There's a rechargeable battery in there, but it also has solar. So
right.
this is bought on Amazon, one of two that I have. I've got another one made by Midland.
Right.
This is Voyager brand, bought on Amazon. But this can charge a cell phone.
Right.
It can charge itself, but it's AM FM radio. So when something happens on the gravity that we're talking about, there's going to be messages that are coming out from the state and local governments, the federal government. Mm-hmm. We're not going to be able to turn on the TV. You can't go to your computer.
Right.
So you have to turn on your radio and actually pay attention and listen. And it's something that a lot of people they're like, what? I've had this talk with people and they're like, are you serious? I can't just, you're there's going to be a chance that's your only source of information.
Yeah, my daughter, I think, I don't know how. I mean, that's one of the things we've talked about is you've got a phone, but it could be bad where you have no service.
Right.
So then, how do you figure out what's going on? How do you get home? Because you can't find maps on your phone. So you have to have a central direction of where I am. How do I get home? That kind of thing. So, a lot of people. I know when I was her age, if I traveled somewhere, you had an atlas or you had maps.
Without a doubt.
Kids her age now, they're not into that at all.
Yeah.
And but my point is, going back to the radio, I think the general public just assumes, or maybe that's too general a statement, but they don't understand that, the phones could go down because you don't have power or satellite service or whatever it is with regard to the phone towers, the cell towers.
Right.
And so you have to have a way to get information. Whether that information is, here's where you go get your water, or here's where you can go get food, or how long this is going to last, or whatever it is, you got to have a way to get information.
Absolutely.
Because I do know that the system is set up so that we'll be pushing out information to the public in various forms, and that's one of the ways that it would be done.
Right. Without a doubt. AM FM radio, I like to think back to my Army days where 1 is none, 2 is 1, and then you can keep adding from there. But that's, I've got 2 AM FM radios that I can get to immediately for me, but we've got others in the house as well. Mm-hmm. You referenced the road atlas. Yeah, their truckers still use them because there's areas that they can travel where there's no cell service throughout our nation, in the trucking industry.
Right.
Love's gas station, I know they have them. I bought one there before, and then even Walmart, in some areas, and I know that's dependent on which Walmart. Sometimes they carry them, sometimes they don't. But a road atlas is an important thing to have, a map, so you can route it out with your daughter, so you can educate your daughter and say, hey, if there's, if everything goes down and your GPS isn't working, you're going to have to pay attention to these roads, this, that, the other, to get home, or whatever area you guys depend, you're going to meet her. But that's something that most people never, ever think about nowadays. Once again, the technology in our cell phone we rely on it for so much.
Yeah, you just assume it's going to work all the time. Yeah, and that's not the case.
That's not the case.
No.
And I mean, it's gone down before with other natural disasters when tornadoes hit throughout, parts of the Midwest and stuff. And that's something that they always talk about when cell phones go down or when there's a national emergency. So thinking back to 9/11, when cell phone towers were still working and operable, but the federal government needed so much of it, they can actually shut down what the general consumer or general person has access to.
Right.
And then texting uses less requirements of the cell towers than phone calls. So texting still works for some people back then. And I realize we're talking a long time ago and everything's advanced and gotten that much better, but there still is a possibility where a flip of a switch can take away the average person's ability to utilize a telephone or cell phone.
Right. I'm with you.
So, that can happen too. So what are you going to do? Well, you have to have a plan. So I think, Sheriff, part of all this and being prepared in the 72 hours, which is not enough, you also have to have a plan in place with your loved ones. You have to have contingencies. You have to have everything figured out. So a lot of that just requires some research, maybe some education, while they can.
Right.
And that's something they need to pass on to those in their tribe before things get bad. Because when things get bad, and we'll just say a horrible storm comes through, right here through the Shenandoah, and we've seen them before. That derecho that happened years ago, that messed up a lot of things for a lot of people.
Right.
And, what do people do? Panic's not going to help, and that's what happens with the average person. When situations arise and they don't know what to do. Well, panic sets in. Well, that's not going to help anything either.
Right. Another thing we talked about before was again, when you're taking those baby steps, those small incremental things to do, is if you run out of power, what are some things that somebody can do? I mean, battery power, gasoline generator, solar power, but you have to, again, go into what can you afford, what you're going to use it for.
Right.
Are you going to use it just to help you purify water? Are you going to use it to help you with your communication? Are you going to use it to help you, whatever it is, cook or whatever? So you got to have a plan for that.
Right, without a doubt. And once again, this kind of goes back to money and storage as well. What can someone afford? I'd recommend for everybody to have a solar-powered battery bank for their telephones. So I can still plug this up and charge it. It's a battery bank for my cell phones, and I can get several charges out of it. But it also has solar capability. So literally, I've tried it. I've tested it. Put it out in the sunlight. After so many hours, it's full and ready to go.
Right.
And this is just the very basic, and this is something, and they make them in different sizes, and this is something that would be very helpful. So, okay, cell phones are still working. That's a great thing. How do I keep it going? But I don't have power in the house.
Right.
And once your other battery packs, because I know my kids each have several battery packs, once those are gone,
and what do you do?
What are we going to do?
Right.
So there has to be other ways. This radio is cool, like I said, because you can plug your cell phone up to it and just keep cranking on the handle, and it's creating electricity, and it's charging your phone, and it's also charging the radio. But these are just a couple things.
Right.
Solar has become huge, and they have these things now called solar generators. I think that they're just large batteries basically that have solar panels. But once again, they can get very expensive. And depending on which size you get, and there's numerous brands out there, I'd recommend anybody who's interested, do some research into it. And then, once you have your budget, you can determine what you're going to need. And then, you talked about gasoline generators. Those are fantastic, but you have to be able to get gas.
Right.
And how much gas can you store?
Right.
So once again, there's money and there's storage, and everybody has to figure out what's going to work best for them.
Right.
There's a stat that just came out this past week, and it said that 70% of Americans have less than a week's worth of food. So, all right, that means 30% are beyond our 72 hours of food storage. But that leaves a lot of people that don't have food.
Right.
And that just came out. I forgot what source I read it from. It was a reliable source. I'm just keeping track. I think it was FEMA-backed article. So they're paying attention to what, Americans are doing.
Right.
But, that's a very small percentage out of a total population that's prepared for anything. So, food-wise.
Right.
Medication's an important one.
Right.
Whether it's just, over-the-counter painkillers, Tylenol,
Right.
And then let's not forget about, first aid kits as well. But we can go into that some other time and talk about in depth,
Okay.
more than just Band-Aids and cotton balls.
Right. I understand. Well, I think what we'll do is I think we covered a lot of ground today. And Roman, I really appreciate you coming in and
Absolutely,
talking with
Sheriff.
us.
It's my pleasure. It's my, this is my community as well. And, I'd like my neighbors to be, as prepared as they can be for when things happen, because we never know when that storm's going to come through and take out power lines and everything else.
Right. I understand. Well, again, everyone, thanks for joining us today. And you can find this and all our other podcasts on my YouTube channel. That's at Timothy Carter. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe so you can get new show updates. And again, thanks so much. This is Sheriff Tim Carter. Talk to you later.